Welcome back to another episode of the FamVestor podcast. I am your host, Sun Marie Burns.
And I'm your co-host, Sunny Burns.
And we are so excited for today's show. We have a very special show lined up for you. We have the host of the #1 marriage podcast on iTunes.
#1.
The One Extraordinary Marriage Show with Tony and Elisa DiLorenzo. And we're going to be speaking to them all about topics relating to marriage. Intimacy, commitment, and a whole gamut of topics that are pertinent to married couples. So if you have little ones in the car with you when you're listening, might be good to reserve this show for a later point in your day.
Yeah, we go pretty deep into intimate conversations, which might not be age appropriate, so definitely
save this one for once the kids have gone to bed. But with that, we would love to jump into our show. Tony and Elisa DiLorenzo speak to a worldwide audience about sex, love, and commitment. And they challenge every listener to make their relationship a priority. For the last 10 years, they've equipped couples with the tools and strategies they need to create their own extraordinary marriage. And I love how, they put a lot of focus on creating intimacy. Physical, emotional, and spiritual. And they take this component and speak to us about so many different great topics to help you really thrive in your marriage.
Yeah, and it's really from a very practical standpoint, and they give a lot of resources so that you can have these conversations that open up the topic between you and your spouse. And I think that's really, really extraordinary. And it's such a great episode. So yeah, check it out.
You're listening to the FamVestor podcast. If you're looking to raise your family with intention, gain financial independence, and live a life of true freedom, you're in the right place. Join us as we explore together how to create thriving families, because strong families are the cornerstone for a world at peace.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the FamVestor podcast. I am so excited today. We have the #1 hosts of the marriage podcast in iTunes. We have Tony and Elisa of the One Extraordinary Marriage podcast. What I loved about their podcast, I stumbled on it probably 8 years ago, right when we were getting married. And
wow.
Yeah,
right,
it was
cool.
It was so cool because, I was just looking for resources, and there's all these like fluffy podcasts about great marriages, but I really wanted the practical. I wanted the good stuff. And, there was also the other side of it where, there were kind of crude podcasts, but you guys were right there, perfectly practical, and you weren't afraid to dive into the really deep, nitty-gritty, how to make a marriage work. And that's why I'm so excited to have you guys here today. Been listening to you off and on for the last 8 years, and to have you guys on our own podcast now is so awesome. So thanks for coming on to the show.
Oh, wow. We're totally honored and blessed.
That's been a long time.
Yeah.
Been a long time listener. That actually makes my heart really happy. Because we've been podcasting for 10 years. So you've been around pretty much since the beginning.
Wow.
We've always said it on the show. It's all about reaching one couple. And so to know that we touched you 8 years ago when you're just about to start your marriage journey is really awesome.
Yeah. And, you guys are I think you guys are up to like 576 episodes. I was just looking, which is crazy. And the amount of
78,
content.
I think now. 578.
Okay, sorry to shortchange you those two. 578. So for those of our audience, who are unfamiliar with your story, with your show, it's all about creating a really ideal, committed relationship where your marriage is the priority. But maybe let's kind of take it back to the beginning. Why did you guys, create this podcast? What is your kind of origin story with your marriage?
Yeah, so the podcast came after, 13 years of marriage. Mm-hmm. So we've been married 23 years now. So it came 13 years after we even started our marriage journey. And it really came out of this place of 2 years prior, we were in a place that wasn't really great in our marriage. We were really at a place where we were looking at ourselves. We had a 5 and a 2-year-old, and we were going, you know what? Are we going to just live life the way we're living it? Are we going to get a divorce? Let's just get this over with, because it's not really great. There's not really much fun going on. There's a lot of tension in here. Are we going to get divorced after the kids turn 18, or are we going to get radical?
Mm-hmm.
And we decided to get radical. So we did a 60-day sex challenge. And it came about because Elise and I were about to lead a small group at our church. Mm-hmm. And it was all going to be around sexual intimacy. It was an 8-week study. And we were watching a show. And the show we were watching was for some friends of ours. Their daughter was doing some sand volleyball tournament. Well, right after that, there are two couples who had done sex challenges. One had given her husband 365 days of sex for his 40th birthday. They never say how many days they did, whatever. We're like, but I was intrigued. I was like, wow, this...
That's quite a birthday present.
That is a birthday present, yeah.
Hard to live up to.
For sure. And then the other couple they did 101 days. Anyways, I'm thinking like, wow, what could we do right now that would be something that's out of what we know, get us out of our rut, make a change, something that just gets us looking in a different direction than we've been in our marriage. And since I knew we were doing that 8-week study, I looked at Elisa and I was like, hey, what if we do, like during this study, we do a 60-day sex challenge?
Mm-hmm. And I said no. Very quickly. It's like not happening. Those kids, like Tony said, our kids were 2 and 5. And so it was really like, I can't be bothered. Like I've got somebody hanging on me all day. I'm exhausted. We've got, carpools and stuff like this. And so I said no. And then I got up and I put on a nice green face mask because I was like, you know what, it's not even happening tonight. Like it's just, don't even think about it.
Right. And I think you bring up an interesting point there about, especially couples with young children, it becomes very challenging to even think about intimacy because you're so exhausted.
All the time.
Yeah.
So how did you challenge that?
The next day I literally had my come to Jesus moment with a basket full of laundry in our garage where it was just this voice in my head. And it was like, if you're not willing to try, then your marriage is over.
Mm.
And just that realization that, Tony wasn't asking me for anything crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he wasn't saying, like you need to chop off an arm or you need, like we need to move to Antarctica.
That'd be really
yeah. He was just saying, look, I want you to make me a priority. I want you to make our marriage a priority for 60 days. And so we ended up completing 40 out of the 60. Wow. And it completely revolutionized our marriage. And we were
not only from a sexual standpoint, because everybody goes,
true.
Oh my gosh, well, it was only about sex. And we're like, no, it wasn't. Actually, it was more about the emotional connection that really allowed us to get through those 60 days and to see from fresh new eyes our marriage, each other, like what we'd taken for granted for so many years was now coming to light. And it was like, it's almost like when you think of silver, like, these amazing pieces, these plates or these pots or whatever, these silver, but when they're just stuck up in the cabinet for a long time, they get all this film on it. But then you use that cream and you start rubbing it and it all starts coming out and the shine comes out again. That's what it was like for our marriage, I think. And through that, we were able to speak at a retreat, share that story. And people were like, well, what's next? And we're like, we're good. Like our marriage we're good. Like there's nothing, there's no next. I mean, we're just going to keep on rolling. And it just, lo and behold, it became something that we were passionate about because we kept telling people and people kept going, we need to hear the story. We need to hear more. And so that's when we jumped into blogging back in the day, which we didn't like because writing was really tough.
Right.
And I think in marriage, there's so many nuances. There's little things that are happening and it's hard to write it all down. And so we got frustrated with it. And a business coach at the time just said, hey, you know what? There's this thing called podcasting. And I'm like, well, what's that? He's like, it's a radio show. Just talk.
Just talk.
Like, well, we can talk. And Elise and I still needed work to be done in our own lives and our own marriage. So I was like, well, man, if we could just talk once a week and put something out there, then let's do that. And we did that 10 plus years ago now and just have not stopped. And we've grown ourselves just unpacking things. I mean, there have been episodes where we've been truly mad at each other on, like, we're just frustrated with one another, working through that nitty gritty or, just life. And so that's how it all started.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, I feel like it's really cool sometimes listening to your podcast. You just hear kind of that, these surprises that come on air and you're like, really? You thought that way? And you just kind of work through it and just like the real relationship just working right there on air. So that's really cool to hear.
Right.
Yeah.
Very honest. And I think it's so important for people to hear that honest relationship because a lot of couples are craving a role model or someone they can ask these questions, but it's very much a taboo topic to talk about sex, to talk about intimacy, and to talk about all the, the feelings that go into it and how to work around it and truly create a thriving marriage. So you have created this platform for people to have that role model to look to and to get ideas and suggestions from.
I appreciate that. One of the funniest ones when you bring that up is whenever we talk about lube. And people get like freaked out. Like lube is an interesting one.
It really ruffles.
It ruffles feathers or something. And we were talking just yesterday. I was talking to a buddy of mine. We were talking, and I just happened to bring it up. And he goes, "Tony, you're one of the only people I know who brings that up in normal conversation. You don't bat an eye. You don't get all weirded out. You don't get all like, you just bring it up as just normal conversation. Like, hey, have you thought about doing this with your wife?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he was just like, "That's so refreshing because it doesn't have to be taboo. It doesn't have to be weird. It doesn't have to be like, oh, why would I do that?" And so it's honestly awesome for us to be able to speak into that.
I was just on your Instagram page and I saw one of your pictures, and I love your Instagram page, but it was like, when after you have kids, you need Vaseline, and you put the Vaseline outside your doorknob so the kids can't get in your bedroom. I'm like, oh, that's so good.
Which is funny because that's actually one of those posts that people get very divided on.
Yeah.
Right? Because we are advocating that parents, especially of young kids, still make their sex life a priority, that they do this. And so there are actually a lot of people that are like, "Oh, but what if my kids need to come in?" And I'm like, it's all good. I mean, you can get up. It's not like we're saying you can't open the door, but we are saying, what does it look like to have that bedroom be a really special space for husband and wife?
Right. And what do you think about, people who are of the opinion, and I think we are, that the best gift you can truly give to your kids is a happy, thriving marriage? What do you have to say about that?
Oh, all day long. I mean, that's what they see, right? I mean, that's what they see. That's what they grow up with. So if they can see that growing up, that's most likely what they're going to model as they go into their own marriage. And so one of mine and Elisa's biggest blessings, I think, that we could do for our kids is talking about sexual intimacy, talking about these topics that we didn't ever have. I mean, my sex talk with my parents, well, it wasn't even with my mom. It was with my dad. He brought it up once. He basically said, "Hey, Tone, don't get a girl pregnant." And that was it. I was like, well, I don't even know how to get a girl pregnant right now. So that really helped me out, Dad. And that was it. Right. And I remember once, were we married at that time, or was I high school? I said something about sex at the dinner table. And no, I think it was high school. Okay, yeah, I think it was high school, but I just said something about sex, and we were at the dinner table, and my dad got mad. I mean, he pounded the table. He said, "This is a sacred table. We don't talk about that stuff." I'm like, whoa. So can we start to change that? Yes. And Elise and I have been able to. We've seen many in the one family who have been able to have open and honest communication about sexual intimacy. Age appropriate, folks. Like, let's make sure we are, you're not talking to a 5-year-old like you're talking to an 18-year-old or 19-year-old.
Right.
So make sure you're being age appropriate, but by all means, yes, talk to them about it.
Yeah, I remember when we first started our marriage, and we were actually looking into like birth control options, and we stumbled on natural family planning, and we went to a natural family planning classes, 6 weeks of classes where all we're talking about sex, reproduction, and how fertility works. And it was just such a gateway to be able to talk with Sunmarie and communicate all about this fertility. What is your thoughts on that? And Sunmarie's coming up with like these eye-opening things like, oh, that's why my body does that. And it's just so cool to see the whole process unfold. But to have that open communication, I feel was so critical, especially at the foundation of our marriage, and just making everything, allowing us to communicate. And I think that communication is so key. I'm sure that's what you found also. You guys coach tons of couples, and I'm sure that's something you see, right? That communication is key within a marriage.
Well, and I just want to applaud the two of you for getting that education on the front side of your marriage, because I mean, we stumbled across the book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility, probably 12 years into our marriage. An acupuncturist had said, "Hey, you need to check this out." And we tell people all the time, like, husbands and wives need to read chapter 3. Like they need to go in and understand what her entire cycle looks like. Because if you understand that, then whether you're choosing natural family planning or you want to understand why am I so aroused in the middle of the month, whatever it is,
right.
You've got the biological basis for it, and it unlocks and frees so many couples to have an extraordinary sex life. But you guys, I mean, kudos to you for starting that conversation.
Yeah.
From the get-go, because that I can definitely tell you beyond a shadow of doubt that launched you into success from the beginning.
Yeah.
Right.
It has been very helpful for sure. And I think that, there's a lot of couples who don't know about those resources. And as you said, whether you choose to apply NFP in your own life or not, just the knowledge that comes with it really frees you to understand, what's going on. But there's so many couples who don't have the luxury of having that knowledge or even knowing where to start. So I'm curious to know, what are some tips you have for couples who want to open the gateway for communication but don't quite know how to start? What do you usually say to help?
So they want to talk about sex, but they're not sure how.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I mean, we have there's a number of different ways to go at it, but we have a free guide called 19 Questions to Amazing Sex.
Okay.
And I do think that's a great way to start, because at least you start having questions of what we could talk about. And that at least gives them something to look at, because I think a lot of times we don't know where to even begin.
Right.
And that can get you stuck real quick, and you need to get out of that comfort zone.
Right.
And we've heard from so many couples who are like, wow, that was what we needed. We couldn't answer all of them right from the get-go, but we could at least start that conversation. I think guides and those things really help us to go, okay, something like a natural family planning, picking up a book like that, that's not so like this position, that position, but it's really about reproduction and about health. In those areas, allow for the conversation to start opening up, because I think it opens up for us men and for the women as well. Like, oh, wow, that's the cycle and that's what's going on. I mean, once we read that, like Elisa said, it began to go, oh, okay. Got it. That's why there's an arousal at that point. But on the other side of that, it's like, wow, we're really like far here, and it's only been 2 weeks. What happened?
Right.
And we'll link to that resource in the show notes. But I was just wondering, can you share like one question that sticks out in your mind that listeners can come away with from that guide?
Oh my gosh. I mean, there are questions about using toys on there. Right. And, would you be comfortable using toys? And that's a question that, in all honesty, we never had before we got married. It's a question that the answer has changed over the years, because it's the thing with using a guide like 19 Questions is that you don't just use it one time and say, okay, well, we're good for the next 40 years. Because, we've talked about having little children. We actually have teenagers, right? Life cycles, when you get to empty nesters, or if there's been, health issues, those things could all change. And so we actually come back to the questions about every 18 months, 2 years or so. Usually it's right around an anniversary. That's usually a reminder to us, oh, let's just check in. But, finding out, like, how do you initiate, right? There's a question. I mean, my sex talks were probably even, shorter than yours. I don't remember ever having any type of sex ed with my parents. And I went to Catholic schools. So like, it was just kind of, all biology. And so when it came to this idea of initiating in marriage, I didn't know how. I didn't know that it was okay. Right. And so those are the kinds of questions that show up on that guide.
And I think that that's so valuable, because it frees you to go to a third party. Well, the question's on the paper, so that's why we're talking about it, rather than it being a personal, well, this was my thought and I wanted to discuss with you. It kind of takes that ownership out of it, and you can talk about it in a more neutral, safe space, I guess. It's like, oh, well, I'm uncomfortable with this question. Okay, well, I didn't come up with it. It was on the paper. We can skip it for today,
Right.
And
so
I
think that's freeing.
Started. Right. It just gets it started. And we've seen couples who go, wow, you know what? We really looked at this and it was a lot. And yet we knew we wanted to have an extraordinary sex life. So we started working through it and talking and open up that conversation. And so it's not, sometimes folks look at these and they're just like, one and done, let's get it done. And it's not that way. It's a continuous conversation that happens. And this is just one way to start that.
Right. And it sounds like for you guys, that experience 12, 15 years, whatever it was, of starting that 60-day sex challenge kind of really rebooted your marriage. It was a change of pace. It really started something for you guys. But I have before that, you said there was some trouble in the marriage. Maybe you guys were feeling like roommates or something like that, or just things weren't as exciting or as extraordinary as you wanted it to be. So I'm just curious, there's so many like enemies to marriage right now. I feel like, there's technology. People are just on their phones every day like that. And, there's divorce is just so prevalent. There's like the pandemic of pornography just everywhere. Everyone has these phones that they can just access, and just so many enemies to intimacy. I'm just curious, like what can you share with our audience that can really help them navigate through those things that are going to, these distractions, the things that are going to veer them off course from creating that extraordinary marriage that all of us really want?
Well, I think a big part of it is just even being aware that those distractions, those enemies, those attacks on marriage exist. I think, Hollywood, romance novels, whatever you want to call it, has painted this really rosy picture that, in 2 hours, all of the challenges are going to be wrapped up, and you're going to, gaze into each other's eyes and sail into the sunset, and you're going to wrap it up. When the reality is that, we all come into our marriage with our own baggage. Like stuff has happened to us before we get married. Stuff happens while we're married. We disappoint each other. We make poor choices. And so it's one, being aware that there are things out there that are actively working against your marriage. I mean, the makers of the phone companies don't want us to just have a phone to make phone calls.
Right.
They want us to have a phone so that our attention is on our phone. And so we have to actively be saying, okay, you know what? I mean, are we going to just have a phone-free night once a week where all the electronics get put away?
Love that.
Where it's not crazy. Like, we're not saying, you can't have a phone in the house. Like, we're realistic, but can you set up an electronic-free zone or an electronic-free night? Can you make those choices that, if pornography has been a problem in your marriage, like that. And I know that, different people have different views on that, but our stance is that no pornography is good in marriage. It's part of our story. It has been incredibly detrimental to our own marriage. And so, if you're in that place, get help, right? Get free of that bondage, because it's changing how you see your spouse. It's changing your sexual intimacy. And it's really, no matter what the distraction or the evil is, we've got to be couples that say, you know what, we're going to go after this. We're not going to settle for status quo. We're not going to settle for being like everybody else, or, what society says is normal. We're going to do things differently.
So I want to dive a little bit deeper into the pornography aspect, because I just see it being such trouble in so many marriages. It pops up all the time when we're talking to our friends, other couples. And, even for me, when I was, going through my teenage years, I got sucked into the pornography. And cell phones weren't even that prevalent. Smartphones weren't that prevalent now. So now it's just so much easier to get sucked in. And luckily, I was able to break free from that, 10 years ago, right before entering our marriage, like a year before. But it was such a challenge to really break free from that. But I felt like, for those couples who are now bringing that into the marriage, and then, being exposed by their wives, finding out or something, it's so troubling. I'm wondering how you guys have counseled other couples kind of through that, and also if you have any like recommendations, because I know it's such a trap.
How did you deal with it in your marriage?
So I was introduced to pornography when I was 12 years old. And back then, we didn't have anything other than magazines.
Right.
So that was my first introduction to it. It was back of somebody's house or some fence line or something. I don't know whoever put it there, but we found it. And then it got worse from there. Back then, satellites began to come into play, and we found out how to break into the XXX channels, my buddies and I, and that just perpetuated it as a teenager. And then it sort of subsided. Like, I left for high school to go to college, and it sort of subsided in those years a little bit. I don't remember it being a grip in my college years for some reason. Maybe it was just because of a different atmosphere or what was going on. There was a lot going on, so I wasn't drawn to it. And yet, as Elise and I we met, and then we began our courtship, there's something in there that I started going back to it. In the early years of our marriage, it was a mess. Like, it was bad. It was definitely looking at it online, going into chat rooms, getting into dark places of that nature. And so we went through it. I mean, I even remember bringing in like penthouse letters, and even just bringing that into our bedroom and reading those. And so we worked, we had a really array of it in different places from when I was young until, I was 30 years old. And at that point in time, we'd been married 7 years, it was part of our marriage.
Yeah. And I wish I could say, it was just like, oh, well, we're just done with this now. And that's all good. Because Tony actually, finally got to, his breaking point where he's like, as he shared the story in the past with me, here I am sitting on one side of the garage wall. He was in the garage. I was in the living room. And he just has that moment of, what am I doing here? My wife's inside with our 1-year-old son.
Right. What
am I doing? And he actually came to me and said, you know what, I'm going to ask you to be my accountability partner. And I had no idea what that entailed. I was just like, okay, I'm still in this state of shock. Like, what's going on? And I was actually leaving 2 days later. We lived in California at the time. I was going to Ohio to visit my parents.
We still live in California.
We do. Yeah. Okay. Yes. We do. Well, we moved a few times.
Yeah, I know, but we still live in California. We still live in San Diego.
But I was leaving him at home 2 days after this revelation with a computer and an empty house. And I did get a phone call.
Yeah, because then it was, she left, and there was this one moment where I was just like, it's okay. And my whole thing was, in that moment when I knew it was over, I knew it was time. And yet her leaving, there's still that, there's such an addiction.
Yeah.
I mean, your brain honestly gets rewired by looking at those images.
Right. And
it's not just us who gets, talking about the one who's viewing it, because it can be both male and female who view it and read it. It's not just us who gets impacted by it, but our spouse does as well, because we have thoughts in our own mind of what the ideal spouse may look like, which is not really or act like, and that's not your spouse. And so when I did go look at it, I held to my word, and I called Elisa and I said, you know what? I viewed it again, and I just heard the hurt and the pain in her voice. And I was like, you know what? I didn't get into this marriage to cause that. And I realized at that point in time, it was done. It was finished. And it was finished. So that was 30 years old. I broke that 18-year habit.
Wow.
And I'm now 46. So it's been 16 years that I haven't looked at it.
That's amazing.
Fantastic.
So it's just a testament to what can happen when you do go, you know what, this is detrimental to my life and to my marriage and to the connection we have.
Right.
And we've seen a massive change. And I will say, I think there has been, and even though that was at year 7 and we still had some years to go to really figure out who we were in our marriage, I will say our sexual intimacy, though, is so much better. It's so much stronger. It's so much more passionate, because it's Elisa and I. There's nobody else in it. There's nothing that I'm thinking about, she's thinking about. And so I think because of that, there's such just that connection we have. There's a great book called Bondage Breaker. I'd say for anybody, pick that up, man. If you're under the bondage of pornography, be it, you're viewing it, or even erotica, you're reading, whatever that may be, Bondage Breaker is a fantastic book to get and read and understand what you're under, but also understanding that the rewiring of your brain and what's really happening.
Right. And thank you for bringing that up and for sharing that book resource there as well.
Yeah.
And I know so many couples struggle with this. And I feel that I was listening to one of your podcast interviews on the marriage grind, and you shared how when you were able to break free from this and really separate yourself from that, all of a sudden you could see your spouse in a new light as the beautiful, incredible person they are, and honoring them for just who and what they are, without bringing in all of this expectation or distraction or images of other people, and trying to transfer that onto your spouse, but truly just seeing your spouse for the amazing person they are. And what a transformative moment I think that can be for couples when they're able to overcome such a addiction.
Yeah. Well, and it's understanding that it's a process, right? Because especially, as you were saying, like what happens when it when it gets discovered.
Right.
And there's this broken trust. And so
hurt, pain,
understanding that, whether we're talking about pornography or financial infidelity or anything that breaks trust in a marriage, there's a process to rebuild. It doesn't just, you don't just like, oh, sorry, won't do it again, we're all better. It's actually walking through a healing process. And that's where, like when we look at our intimacy and can honestly say that it's better than it's ever been, it's because we've walked through the journey together. It's because we made the decision, you know what, this has been a chapter in our marriage. And if you're dealing with pornography, you can look at it and say, this has been a chapter of my life. What am I going to write for the next chapters? What do I want that future to look like with my spouse? How do I want to see them? What do I want this area of our marriage to look like? And you can actually create a new chapter, but you have to get involved in the process. It doesn't just go away.
Right. So I'm curious, we kind of talked about, some challenges there. Now that I kind of want to get up to like the excitement, because I feel like your podcast is all about excitement, trying new things. And I know like so many couples are just, really just, they've been married a long time and they've been having sex, but maybe it's starting to dwindle. It's not as interesting. The honeymoon phase is over, and I feel like you guys are really good about being creative and just sharing your journey. What are some good things to do? And I feel like the answer is going to be the sex challenge. But what are some really good things to really kick off a new phase of your marriage where you're really just starting to explore each other and start this new journey together of like an extraordinary marriage?
I would say your first place to look at is your bedroom and making that bedroom your sanctuary. And seriously looking at your bedroom and going, what's in here? Like, what do we have in our bedroom? Like, if you got laundry piled high and you got like the treadmill that's now become the closet and it's holding all the clothes and you have boxes to the ceiling. I think that's a place to look and go, what is our bedroom to us? Is it just another room in the house? Is it just something that we just throw things in and it's just, that's what it is and we sleep here and then we're done? Or is it really a sanctuary? Is it this place that we get to connect? We get to unwind from the world. We get to have time with one another.
That's because literally when you cross the threshold, if we're talking about sexual intimacy, you cross the threshold and most couples are having sex in their bedroom, right? So what does that environment look like? And then I think the other thing too, to really create the extraordinary, yes, we love it when couples do sex challenges. So I'm not going to say, no, that's not a great place to start. Not everybody's doing the 60 days. There's a reason we wrote the 7 days of the sex challenge, but it's also looking at what's your mindset around sex. Right? If it's becoming routine, then what are the thoughts that you're having about how you desire your spouse? What are the thoughts that maybe you've internalized over the years about trying new positions or having sex in different areas of the house? Or, even if you've gone from it just being the two of you and now you're a parent, do you have beliefs about what a mom should do or what a dad should do when it comes to sex? Because all of that plays into how you're showing up in the bedroom. Right. And it's interesting that I spent years not being aware of the fact that I did have some beliefs like, well, I'm a mom now. Moms don't do that kind of thing. Right? Like moms aren't, crazy in the bedroom. Well, moms can be. Like there's no law that says that a mom can't have a great, fabulous sex life because she's also a wife. So wives, go have it. And so looking at your beliefs, in addition to looking at the environment, and yes, do a sex challenge, try new positions. Get out of your bedroom. It's okay to have sex in other rooms of the house. It is okay. Just make sure the kids aren't around or they're, after bedtime.
We were reading your 7-day sex challenge, and it was funny. You had written that you guys had sex for the first time in a vehicle after you were married. It was just kind of funny just hearing your story on that.
Yeah, that was interesting. And it hasn't happened many months often after that, but it's one of those things where it's just sort of like, you know what? We can do these things. We can enjoy one another in this way. And again, we tell anybody who's going to do that, man, make sure you are abiding by your local laws, jurisdictions. We are not liable if you get a ticket with a cop, knocking on your window, wondering what you're doing.
Right.
But with that being said, that was something that Elise and I needed for us to go. It doesn't only have to be the missionary position in our bed once
in the dark.
Once a week or once every other week in the dark. It allowed us to go, oh, well, wait a minute. You know what? We have a shower. Oh, you know what? We have other rooms in our own home. Oh, you know what? That means we can try different positions, because even in a car, it's hard to do missionary because it's tight. Like, you got to start figuring things out. And we begin to just go like, let's look at this as an adventure. Let's enjoy this. Let's enjoy one another. Let's have these conversations. Do they always go exactly the way we planned? No, but it's okay, because we know that we're in this together, and we're going to stick together, and we're going to like have fun. Believe me, there are still moments where we go, whoa, that didn't work the way we expected.
That's a no. We won't be doing that again.
But you don't know unless you try.
Right. And we don't take it as a failure. We take it as like, hey, we gave it a shot. That didn't work for us. And then there are other people who are just like, oh my gosh, how could that not work? It's so great, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, all right, cool. That works for you guys.
Right,
so that's
right.
awesome.
I think one of the things that you mention in your writings, in your podcast often is, when you take on a challenge, like a 7-day or 60-day challenge, I think the initial response when people hear about it is a little bit of shock, and then they think, oh, that's, that sounds like fun. But I think what you bring up is the point that it's this immense growing opportunity, and sometimes it's challenging, especially when you take on a challenge of a certain length of time. You go through times when maybe you're more in the mood, maybe you're not, but the point is the commitment that you're making to one another to prioritize each other and to develop your prioritizing intimacy in your marriage. So I thought I wanted to touch on that a little bit, and what revelations you've experienced through doing something like this. How, what have you discovered about each other outside of physical connection that you grew in this kind of a challenge?
Yeah, especially maybe in those first 60 days, how that kind of played out.
Yeah.
Well, I remember my first aha when we did the 60 Days of Sex Challenge, because like Tony said, kids were 2 and 5. We'd been married 11 years at that point in time. And I think my first big aha was, oh my gosh, I really like sex. and I can be thinking about it. Like,
what?
Because now,
radical.
Yeah. Well, they asked.
I know. I'm just saying, just hearing that though, sometimes you're just like, wow, like why wasn't it before?
Right.
Well, and we had fallen into routines where we were having sex so infrequently that there was all this pressure on each sexual encounter to be like amazing and fireworks. And so part of it was just, what does the emotional connection look like in between the physical encounters? And bless his heart, I've got a husband that learned how to listen during the 60 days because the kids were little. And so for me to be intimate, I've got to kind of unload what's in my head. And so we would have these sometimes very epically long conversations, and he would listen and he would listen. And then I do remember there were a few nights where you're like, honey, it's 11:55. So if we're going to get this in today and have it count for today,
better get going.
Got to wrap it up the story. But it was really this idea of, what does it look like to make the person that I said, the most important person in my life, what does it look like to actually make him be a priority? What does it look like to say our marriage is really important?
Yeah. And for me, I found that, so where we were in that time, in frame of mind even, I was running our business, and then, which was another business, and Elise was a stay-at-home mom. And I think I was in that mindset of typical roles within a marriage. Like, I'm working, I'm doing my thing, you handle the household, which I began to learn isn't even equal. I had the easier side of that by far. And during the 60 Days of Sex Challenge, though, I realized like the little things that I could do to help Elisa, the more she was available for me. So if I would do the dishes, which I took part in dinner and everything like that, or if I took care of the kids, giving them a bath or putting them to bed or helping out in these ways, it was interesting how much more time we had for one another.
Right.
Because she wasn't doing all that extra stuff. And yeah, believe me, were there days when I was tired and beat down? Sure. Long days, getting up early, long days out there, for sure. And yet I began to realize the importance it was for just helping her out. And and really, it wasn't even helping her out. It was really me standing up and going, I have a responsibility in this household as well, and I haven't taken it on. And I'm just starting to take on some of those responsibilities, freeing her up to be like, oh my gosh, now I have an extra hour, an extra hour and a half of time every day that we can connect. It's like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that for me was pretty.
It was epic the first time I came out from putting a child to bed and the dishes were done. And it sounds so inconsequential, but it was just his realization of, I can do this for you. We don't have to, you're the homemaker, so you've got to do this. But I think that's been the biggest thing that we've heard from so many couples over the years who have done a challenge, that they do rediscover one another. They rediscover how to love one another. And yes, well, if you're calling it a sex challenge, it's obviously about sex. How much more gets drawn into the marriage in such a positive way, because it's not just about sex.
Yeah, you mentioned at one point saying like it helped you stop keeping score of, oh well, I did this, you didn't do enough of this or that, or like not fighting the little battles because it wasn't worth it if you knew you were going to come together later. Why ruin the atmosphere? And I was wondering if you could talk to that a little bit too, because I think that's quite a revelation as well.
Yeah, that was probably the first time where we saw our marriage and the two of us in our marriage as on the same team. So instead of us being against each other, and I love to use the analogy of a football team because our boy plays football. And I really do think that way. I think we were seeing ourselves as, I'm on offense, she's on defense, and one of us has to score.
Right.
But the other one is trying to stop each other from scoring. And I think it was through this time that we said, wait a minute, we're on the same team here.
Right.
Like we want to have something that's extraordinary, something that's special, something that's different than everybody else. And yet, why are we fighting each other? So I think that was that time where we began to go, all right, we're both on offense now. There is a problem. There is an issue. How are we going to come together and fight that problem together instead of fighting against each other? And that's taken years for us to learn. I think in that first 60 days, though, we turned it quickly. Like we were able to go, yes, we're there. And then over the years, it's just been tweaking that playbook, just like any great coach would do with his team. He's going to look at his playbook game to game, season to season, and go, what can we do better? What can we change? What little tweaks can we make so that way we continue to move forward and not allow the problems to continue to come against us and take us out?
Wow, I love that. I know for us, when people ask us for, our top tips on marriage advice, one of our top 3 is be on the same team, no matter what you're going through. Because like you just said, it's so crucial to a happy relationship is feeling like you're not at odds with each other, but that you view whatever challenge comes your way as the problem and you are the team to solve it together. And that when you work together, it can be done so much better than if you're, trying to play the blame game. Well, okay, the dishes aren't done and we wanted to get to bed already. It's your fault. You didn't wash the dishes. Like, no, maybe we both should work on this so we get it done quicker and then we have more time to do the things that we want to be doing.
Right.
So that's such a key component that you just mentioned there. I love that.
Yeah, and I think that's just such great advice. I'm wondering, do you guys have other advice that you love to give young couples just starting out on their marriage? Any quick tips you can share with our audience?
Use lube.
Use lube.
There it is.
Well, that's actually no joke.
Sexually, it's no joke. Like whenever we go to weddings, Elisa for sure.
Well, if I get invited to a bridal shower, you're getting lube from me. You are.
Lube and usually what? Sex stack?
Sex stack.
So it's a fun. So it's a fun game where it's like Jenga, but but when you pull out one of the blocks, it'll have a number, and then there are cards, accompanying cards that you can pick from, like from, I think
it's like really mild
to like, more extravagant. Let's just say that way.
Or extreme.
Extreme.
Yeah.
And you can pull those cards, and then you put the number to it, and it tells you what to do.
Yeah,
and it's
so
like
it's a sexual act. And if you knock it over, then the game's over and you guys go, do what you're going to do, have sex. But yeah, that is definitely something, because here's because so many of us grew up without parents who were talking to us about sexual intimacy, women who don't know, how their bodies work and things like that. All of a sudden you get married and it's supposed to be wonderful, but if you've got vaginal dryness, it is not wonderful, right? Like that's just, it hurts. And friction, there are definitely places where friction in life is a good thing, but in your bedroom during this act of sex, it's not good. It's not good. So that's why we're big fans of lube.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too is, and it's been said so many times in different ways over the years, but whatever you did to win the person actually needs to keep happening. I mean, I think that was really where we lost our way probably in the first 10 years. We're like, we've had the wedding, we did the whole cake thing, we took a honeymoon, we're good. And we took our hands off the wheel instead of saying, oh, wait a minute, like we still have to have conversations and we still have to be intentional and we still have to make date nights a priority. And there were all of these things that we just kind of stopped doing.
Right.
And what we see time and again in the one family is those couples that get intentional and do all the things that they did on the front end of their relationship start to create the extraordinary. And that's really where it comes back for them.
And I would say for the spouse who's listening and they're like, well, I want to do it, but my husband doesn't or my wife doesn't.
Right.
Good.
It doesn't mean that you stop. You find out what you can do. Where are you making those changes? Where are you pressing in? What are you looking at? Like, again, for an example of the bedroom, is your bedroom a sanctuary? Are you looking at it waiting for your spouse to come in and go make the changes? Or can you look at your room and go, you know what? I'm going to go in there and I'm going to start cleaning it out. And I'm going to make this room what I know it needs to be for us. So don't think that your spouse can't change. Right. It may be right now, it doesn't look like it. And yet we have seen it time and time again. Spouses who step out and go, you know what? I can do this. And I'm going to start doing what I can do on my side. Because really, a marriage is two individuals willing to grow together.
Right.
And sometimes that happens at different times. Sometimes you're really growing and your spouse just isn't right now. And other times your spouse is really growing and you're not right now. It's okay. It's not always even. We've seen that in our own marriage.
Yeah, I think that's such important advice, never taking each other for granted and continually investing into that relationship because, it's the most important thing you can really do with your life.
Like anything else in your life, you want to get good at anything, you want to have something really work out well for you, you have to work at it. And marriage is no different than anything else in that regard. The more effort and the more work you put towards it, the better it will be, and I think that we were mentioning at the beginning of the talk, Hollywood has created this whole vision of, kind of this fantasy love leading up to the wedding, and the wedding day is like the culmination of it all, and then all of a sudden that's the end. No one ever tells you the journey after that, and I feel like so many couples realize after the wedding, oh, this is work. And some couples translate that into, oh, maybe we're having problems. Maybe we're not meant to be together because it's not like it was in the movies. It's not effortlessly feeling adored and adoring the person I'm with. It's something that's nitty and gritty and I got to work at it. But I feel that you bring a really good point here. Growth is a key component to any successful marriage and the awareness that you have to continue growing always to make it work and to make it thrive.
Definitely.
And we can always look at ourselves. Like, what can I do? It's always a great question because it's very easy to point to our spouse and go, you need to do something.
Yes.
And it may be right now, it's like, what can I do to make a difference? And some of it could be, it's practical, and some of it may have to be, things that you need to start like peeling back the onion because there may be hurts or pains or things of that nature, sexually, emotionally, financially, whatever it may be in your marriage, that you just need to get some healing over as well.
Right. That's a good point too.
Yeah. I'm curious. We kind of touched on this at the beginning of the podcast where we're talking about, how parents communicate about sex to their children. I'm curious, you guys have teenagers now. When did you have a talk with them? Did you have a talk with them? And just if you want to just share, because our audience, there's so many young families there. Yeah. And even us, we have a 5-year-old and we're just like, when do you talk to
A lot of them are
this?
wondering, when do you start a conversation?
And how do you broach it?
What do you do?
In our case, our youngest came to us and, after school one day, and it was funny because we were actually just looking at a video of us telling the story yesterday. So it's funny that you guys asked this question, but she was in second grade. She came home and we're sitting there at the dinner table and she's like, I know what sex is.
Oh boy.
Fantastic, girl.
Okay. And this is in that moment where as a parent, you can either completely freak out and be like, oh my gosh, or you can just start figuring out exactly what it is that they know. And so I said, really, honey? So tell me, what did you learn? And she said, well, sex is when a man and a woman get under the covers and they're kissing. And I said, you're so close. You're so close. Because remember, she's, at that point in time, she was 7. Right. And I said, it's a husband and a wife. Right. And so you'll have those opportunities to frame it based on your beliefs as they present information to you. I mean, I remember one point in time we were driving to a friend's house, and because she's definitely the more curious one and the more talkative one of our 2 kids. Yes. And she was like, so Mom, how are babies made? And she's so matter of fact. And literally we were like pulling up into their driveway. And I just said, honey, great question. We're about to head in. We'll talk about it before bed. And I just had a very, kind of biological conversation with her before bed that night. And I had this book that I actually had when I was a kid. And she's like, that's gross. And it's okay for our kids to have that reaction, especially if they're younger and they're just finding out for the first time. And all I said to her in that moment was, honey, it's totally normal for you at this age to think that that's gross. When you're married and your husband loves you, it's going to be the most amazing thing. And so we frame it, we answer their questions. I mean, as our kids went through middle school, I would, with our oldest, we have an older son and a younger daughter. And I would just tell him like, look, you're going to a party. You're not allowed to be in a girl's room by yourself. And, all of your feet always are on the floor and you're always upright. Like we're not laying down. And over the years, that conversation has changed based on the circumstances. But if I could say one thing to parents thinking about having conversations with their kids about sex is this is not a one-time conversation. Right.
It's not one and done. You want to have multiple conversations. You want to keep it fluid. You want to keep it open, share, listen. And again, I think as Elisa said, when our youngest brought it up to her, she was in the second grade. So keep it age appropriate. Our minds go to the worst, I think. And yet it's just asking them to share what they know and then framing it in a way that they can understand at that age. You don't want to go all into it with the 7-year-old. You're just not going to help them out in any way, shape, or form. So allow the conversation. I think the big thing is, as you guys have learned just listening to us, if you guys can feel comfortable talking to each other about sexual intimacy, the conversation with your kids just comes naturally there. Because you guys have a sense of where you are sexually in your own marriage and you understand it. So now for you to share with them, it's not weird, it's not funky, it's not like, oh my gosh, my kids know I'm having sex, blah, blah, blah. No, it's just, this is something that we are so blessed to be able to do. And I want my kids to be able to enjoy that as well.
Right. And one other thing that I would add to that is the fact that as parents, you want to be the first person that your kid hears about sex and sexual intimacy from. You want to be the first person teaching them about their bodies. Obviously, when our daughter brought that home from the playground, I mean, she got that fabulous piece of information on the playground at school. And because we'd already had, other conversations with her, it wasn't so much, I mean, that was definitely a shock, but it wasn't something that we couldn't broach the subject. But if you're dealing with fear on bringing the subject up with your kids, you're like, oh, I don't know what to do. There are a lot of great books out there on talking to your kids about sex, age appropriate. You can find, Amazon's got tons of them. And so you start looking at and resource yourself now. If you're thinking, okay, this is still a couple of years away, it's okay. Start now. Start just researching. So when that question comes out of the blue from the backseat of the car and you're like, oh, like friends just told us the other day, because they've got littles like 2 and 10 months, I think, or 3 and 10 months. And so they've played the show in their car and things like that. And all of a sudden in the back, one of the kids is like, sex.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, the 2-year-old.
They're 2-year-old. And they were quick on the fly. They're like, let's count 4, 5, 6. Yeah. And so So they immediately, turned it into something fun and because obviously they're going to have this conversation with their child at that age because there's nothing to talk about. But that's where we want to just have that comfort level, and we want to have fun with it. We want to just be comfortable as husband and wife so that we can be comfortable with our kids.
Right.
Awesome. Tony and Lisa, you guys have shared such great golden nuggets with our whole audience, and there's so much gold there, and there's so much more for the audience who's listening. Definitely check out the One Extraordinary Marriage podcast, and I feel like if you guys as a couple can make that a mission to make that a daily listen, these conversations on how to make an intentional marriage, how to make an extraordinary will just naturally occur. So I feel like that's like just listen to the podcast and just talk about it on a weekly basis. I feel like that'd be so extraordinary. Is there any other resources you'd like to point, or what's a great way to get in touch with your resources? Just go ahead.
Yeah, so like you said, Sonny, if you want to find us, go look at One Extraordinary Marriage show on your favorite podcast app. We're in all of them. So find it, start listening. I think that's the best place. If you want to come see what we're doing online, go to oneextraordinarymarriage.com. And we have everything there, from our podcast to articles to other freebies as well. And love to get you and have you part of the One family.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.